Now, I'm familiar with the typical problem-solving process of
Hmm.
a mediation, be it a commercial or workplace or even community, where you have, you meet the parties
Hmm.
sometimes independently or depending on what your approach, your philosophy is around mediation. But let's say you gather the parties, they deliver their opening
Hmm.
statement, and then they respond to each other. There's an exploration. If we think of the arc of
Yes.
mediation, I like to think of the arc of mediation. There's an
Yeah.
exploration where you sort of, pull everything out on the table, then you organize things into a nice, neat agenda,
Hmm.
identifying interests, then start to generate options, and then sort of narrow things down into some kind of negotiation and then a conclusion. I mean, how
Hmm.
does that compare to the family mediation process? And by the
Well,
way,
so
that takes place, typically during the course of one day, and you've already said that family mediation can go on for sometimes years.
yes, correct. So that's a really interesting question. And I think the best way to answer it is that we can say that what you describe, that's a lovely description of the arc of family mediation, or some people call it a 4-stage, a 5-stage, a 7-stage process from, opening, setting the agenda, exploring, brainstorming, negotiation, and bargaining. That all also happens in family mediation. So substantively, the process is the same. Where it differs is the more structural aspects of it. So, family mediation would generally take place in a series of sessions, normally a session lasting between 1 and 2 hours, maybe once a week, once every fortnight, whatever suits the parties and how, depending on how the service works. So that process will take place over a period of time, over a series of sessions. Couple of reasons for that. Number one, parties may need to gather information, financial information, seek legal advice, think about, reflect on options in between times, and also going back to the emotional environment, it can be just overwhelming to try to negotiate the entire consequences, suite of consequences of the breakdown of a relationship over the period of one day. It's just too much for people. Clients will often say that they're exhausted after a 2-hour session because it's so intense. So that is why you would generally run this process over a series of weeks, by and large. The other thing that is different is that you will generally work with parties in a combination of joint and single sessions. I know in commercial mediation, for example, the default in Ireland would be to do shuttle mediation. So the parties spend very little time together. In family mediation, particularly if there is a joint parenting structure to be negotiated, it's much more helpful to work with the parties together, because beyond just agreeing the terms and conditions, if you like, of a parenting plan, we would be hoping as mediators to foster positive and effective communication between parties, to allow them to have a productive, facilitated conversation on what's important to them, and to gain a little bit of a better understanding of where each of them are coming from within that tight and tense emotional space. So you will work more generally with the parties together. Finally, then, the other aspect of the process that is probably somewhat different is the comparative lack of formality. Now, we all know that mediation isn't a formal process at the best of times, usually, but we would generally eschew structures such as formal opening statements in family mediation, because it's just not really appropriate to the context, and asking highly emotional parties to make opening statements can just lead to unnecessary stress and can polarize the parties even more. We will, of course, always facilitate the parties in having their uninterrupted time to speak and to put their point across to the mediator and to the other side, but within a more relaxed framework, I think, is the best way to describe it.